السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Today inshallah we are going to talk about chapter 2, which is titled Cryptographic Tools. Cryptographic Tools. In other words, it might be called encryption tools. Cryptography or cryptographic tools is important elements in many computer security services and applications. They are some algorithms that are used to hide the main data or information from being seen by non-authorized parties. There are some other purposes that we are going to talk about them, but mainly it is to preserve the confidentiality. You may remember, or you may even practice in your daily life, that there are a number of people sitting in one hall, in one room, or as you are sitting in your class, for example, and you would like to pass a message verbally, for example, to one of your classmates in the same class, but you don't want others to understand it. You want only the one that you want to know what do you mean. The others may hear your message, may hear what you are saying, but they should not know what do you mean by that. For example, I have a previous agreement with my classmate that whenever I say to him, let's go home, for example, we mean that let's go to the library, for example, and so on. So you have a previous agreement about some concepts that whenever you write or say them, you mean something else specifically. Okay, so this is the same concept here, that I may send a message with a carrier. It is open, he can see it, but he has no idea what do I mean by that. Okay, there are some other ways to keep the confidentiality of a specific message, like putting it into a sealed, closed envelope and signing at the cover of that envelope, but we are going to discuss it during this chapter with different aspects. Okay, so we know now that cryptographic tools or cryptography is algorithms, different types of algorithms. Okay, so each of these algorithms should be in a specific standard, should be standardized in order for the other party to know the original message. So let's begin with the symmetric let's begin with the symmetric encryption. Symmetric encryption is used in the widest variety of contexts. First of all, it is clear here that its main purpose is to keep the confidentiality of the transmitted or stored data. It is important here to emphasize on this point. Okay. So the confidentiality is kept for both the stored data at the location where they are stored, either on the hard disk, on the server, on a USB drive, and so on, or even in the cloud, and while they are transmitted, while they are sent, while they are on their way to the other party or location. Okay, it is also called conventional encryption, conventional like traditional encryption, or a single key encryption. Okay, a single key encryption, it means that the same key that the sender will use to encrypt the original message, it will be the same key that will be used by the receiver to decrypt. The opposite is decrypt. So here, see that we have plain text, because be careful about the concepts here. So the original message is called plain text, or the original message, the original document. It is called plain text input. So here is X. It is inserted into an encryption algorithm such as DES, and we will talk about it in a while. Using what? Using a secret key. So using a key K here, and then the output of this process of the encryption algorithm is called ciphertext. So after the plain text, after being encrypted, it will be called ciphertext. Okay, the ciphertext is transmitted, so anyone here in between will not be able to know the plain text, the original message. It will reach the receiver, the recipient side. It will be decrypted at the recipient side, decrypted, the opposite of the encryption, the reverse of the encryption algorithm, using the same key in order to have again the plain text. So the plain text here should be exactly the same as the plain text sent originally. So this is called symmetric, one key encryption. Okay, its requirements that it needs a strong encryption algorithm, and sender and receiver must have obtained copies of the secret key in a secure fashion and must keep the key secure. Obviously, that the key should not be sent at the same time using the same means of transmission. What is the benefit if we send the plain text or the encrypted text with the key? If you are sending a box, physical box, that it is locked by a key, but you send it to other parties, to someone else in another city with the key. So anyone can have that box with the key together, can open it and read it. It is the same concept. I should send the message after the encryption, and afterwards or before that I should communicate the key with the recipient. Okay? There are two types of attacks against the symmetric encryption. The first one is called brute force attack, and the second one is cryptanalytic attack. Talking about the brute force attack first, it's called brute force attack. It is trying or attempting all possible keys on some ciphertext until an intelligible translation into plain text obtained. So the attacker is going to try all possible keys that he expects that will open that message or will decrypt that text. Okay, so keeping trying. For example, if the key is only numbers, 6 digits, so the attacker will try 1 2 3 4 5 6, then 1 2 3 5 4 6 6 4 5 through, and so on. Will try to have any set of 6 digits of numbers. Okay, so at a minimum we would like to think about this. How can we defend against it? Or how can we make it difficult for the attacker to get in, to break in the key? And notice that I said, how can we delay the attacker? So we are not able to prevent the attacker completely, as we said on the first chapter. So it is a matter of delaying, of making it difficult for the attacker to break the key directly or immediately. By the time the attacker may get bored, may give up, and then abandon the attack process. Okay, on average, half of all possible keys must be tried to achieve success, to achieve breaking the key. Some of the countermeasures against this sort of attack is setting, for example, a limitation on the failed attempts. if an attacker or an user, if a user entered a password and it is wrong for one time, second time, third time, the account will be blocked, for example, or an extra credential, an extra authentication method will be requested from the user to get in. Okay, it is an example of that. Another way of defending against this sort of attack is to have a more complex and a longer and a more complex key. If it is longer than 6 digits, for example, it will increase the number of attempts. If it is more complex than only a number, it will have, like, for example, numbers, capital letters, small letters, and symbols. The time needed and the attempts needed to break in will be much more higher. Okay, so even though that the processing capabilities that we have nowadays with high performance processors may decrease the time for the attackers to generate different keys, but still it is a countermeasure. It is like a hindrance against this sort of attack, especially that we know that usually the attackers, the professional ones, will not try the different possibilities manually. Usually there is like a small sort of code that they can develop or they can write to generate these keys randomly or in a specific sequence. Okay, the other sort of attack is cryptanalysis. Crypt from cryptography and analytic from like analytics. So from its title, there is sort of analysis needed here in order to guess the key itself. But this analysis is based on what? Usually it is based on the nature of the algorithm. If the attacker knows what is the nature of the algorithm, the attacker may have some previous knowledge of the general characteristics of the plain text, of the original message, of the original data. He knows that it is in English, for example, it is only numbers or it has some other factors. Okay, and it depends also on some sample of plain text ciphertext pairs. So the attacker may have access to some previously breathed or previously disclosed, exposed data that can give them both the plain text and the ciphertext. The ciphertext, the encrypted text, and it is original text. So from it, especially if there are a number of instances of these pairs, so he may be able to deduce, to infer the relation between plain text and the ciphertext, and thus he will be able to now analyze the current ciphertext and get the original plain text. So it exploits the characteristics of the algorithm to attempt to deduce, to infer a specific plain text or the key being used. The problem with it is that if it succeeds once, so all future and past messages encrypted with that key are compromised, will be also exposed. So this is a comparison between different types of or different algorithms of symmetric encryption. We have, for example, the data encryption standard, DES, triple DES, triple data encryption standard, and the advanced encryption standard. Each one of them is a different algorithm and it has its own features. Here, for example, in the DS, the block size of the plain text in terms of bits is 64, and the ciphertext will be 64 as well, while using the key size of 56 bits. See, but if we use this triple time, three times, so we will have a key of 112 or 168 bits. And in the advanced one, we have a larger block size of the plain text and ciphertext with a larger key size, 128, 192, or 256 bits of the key size. Generally, you don't have to memorize the numbers, but you need to get the general and broad understanding that the more or the larger, let's say, the larger the key, the more secure the algorithm. Okay, so this one, or using 168 for example, key size is more secure than 56, and 256 bits of key size is more secure than 168. Some of you may think or may say in his mind that, okay, while we know that this is the most secure one of these three algorithms, so why we don't always go with this, with the more secure one? Think about it, why? Do you have a response to that? Do you agree with that or not? Okay, I have an argument here. I agree with you slightly that our higher security should be our aim, but let's think about the other side of it, the usability and the cost, for example, the processing needed, the processing overhead, it is said, and so on. So if we are going to apply this algorithm always for all sorts of data, it will be time and cost and processing consuming. Okay, if the data is very sensitive, very critical, okay, we can use the advanced one to encrypt it. But if they are not that sensitive, they are not that critical, we can use a less secure one, knowing that if the block size is larger and the key size is larger, so its cost will be higher usually, and the processing time and capabilities needed will be more, okay, and the waiting time for the response will be also more. So we need to think even about the response time needed for some systems that the response is not that important. The user is not expecting to have a spontaneous instant response. It is okay to apply this, for example, while we are happy with the cost and with the processing overhead. But if it is not, like for example, in our own daily use of our smartphones, am I ready to press opening a file, for example, our message, and wait for 1 minute for the decryption, or to wait for sending it, wait for 1 minute or 2 or 3 or 5 minutes to do the encryption first and then send it, or for opening it and then open and be able to read it? Usually no. We get used to instantly open messages and sending them. So we need to have the trade-off, the balance between the different factors that we have mentioned. And these are some more details about each one of these algorithms that we have just talked about. Go through them, but don't go deeply. You don't need to know the history of it and the exact details of it. This is an example of the average time required for exhaustive key search. See that this is what we talked about in terms of the key size. This is for the cipher, like the encryption algorithm is DS. This is the number of alternative keys to power 56 or 56 exponential. So it is equal to about 7.2 times 10 power 16. The time required at 10 power 9 decryptions per second is 1.125 years to break this key. The time required if you have a higher or faster processing, it will be 1 hour. See that big difference? From 1 year we are able to decrease the hack or the break-in to 1 hour, and then go through the others. The general idea is the same as what we have mentioned. The larger the key size, the longer time needed to break in, and thus the more secure the algorithm. Okay, see that it is not just because of It is titled Advanced AES. Is not always is better or more secure than, or more robust, more resilient than triple DS. But it is a matter of the block size, of the key size, sorry. The AES here with 128 bits key size is less secure than the triple DS with 168 key size. But see that when we use the AES with larger keys, so we have a better and more secure algorithm. Okay, this is the triple DS, or sometimes called 3DS. Simply, it is repeating the basic original DS 3 times, using either 2 or 3 unique keys for each time. For each one, do the DS with a key, and do the DS again on the ciphertext of the first encryption with the same key or with a different key, and the third time. Like, think about it, having a key box inside the box inside the box. Sometimes if the key size is longer, it will overcome the vulnerability of brute force attacks, and it will need a longer time to break in. But unfortunately, it is, as you can imagine, as having another one with another one, it is usually sluggish, like slow, very slow. The advanced encryption standard is replacing both of them if we need. As we said, that the 3DS is sluggish, is slow, so AES will serve the purpose while introducing or producing the results faster. There are some practical security issues that has to be taken into account. Typically, symmetric encryption is applied to a unit of data larger than a single 64 bits or 128-bit block. So how the algorithm or this algorithm will deal with that? Like email messages, for example, that are usually longer than that, network packets, database records, and so on, all are larger and than 64 or 128-bit block. So they have to be broken up into a series of fixed length block for encryption. The electronic codebook ECB is the simplest approach to multiple block encryption. So as we said, each block of plain text is encrypted using the same key. So it is split into parts based on the size, that the block size, and each block is encrypted using the same key, the same main key. However, using this way, using this mode, the cryptanalysts attackers may be able to exploit regularities in the plaintext. If they get into one of the blocks, they will be able to access all the message. So this is an example of taking a message, encrypting it, and then the other part will decrypt it. And this is the other block. It will be encrypted, and when it reads, it will be decrypted in the same sequence, and so on. So this is block cipher encryption. This is called block cipher encryption. Each one of these encryption, or if each one of these blocks is encrypted using the same key. Okay. The other solution is called stream block encryption, like taking a larger sequences to overcome the repetitive encryption by taking block by block. Like here, for the stream encryption, the plaintext byte stream will be entering the encryption algorithm, and a key will be used for that stream for all of them together, not block by block. And then when it reaches there, the whole stream will be decrypted using pseudo-random generator to decrypt the message. So as you can imagine, here is expected to be faster than using the block cipher, the electronic codebook, block by block. See, the block cipher processes the input one block of elements at a time, produces an output block for each input block, can reuses keys, and it is more common. Whereas the stream cipher, which is this one, processes the input elements continuously as a stream, produces output one element at a time. As I mentioned, it is faster and use far less code. It encrypts plaintext 1 byte at a time as a stream continuously, not block by block. The pseudo-random stream is one that is unpredictable without knowledge of the input key. We are going to talk about random and pseudo-random, but pseudo-random like semi-random. It is not 100% random, that it cannot be expected or guessed, but it is pseudo-random. It can be expected or guessed only with a prior knowledge about the input key. We have, within the same context, we have something called message authentication. Message authentication. When we say message authentication, we protect or message authentication, let's say, acts as a first defense line for the message, to protect the message, or in other words, the data. So concentrate here, please, that message or data authentication, same meaning. It is different than the user authentication that we are going to talk about it on chapter 3, on the following chapter. Okay, so here we care about the message and the data, but there, of course, we are caring about the user identity. Here, about the message, it protects against active attacks. It verifies received message is authentic. And it can use conventional encryption. So it is not only protecting against exposure of our disclosure of the data. It's not only protecting the confidentiality, but in addition to that, it is also protect against the unauthorized modification, alteration. This means that it protects also the integrity here. So it is not only the confidentiality is protected here, but also the integrity. If the confidentiality is protected and the integrity is protected as well, so we are able to prove that the message received is authentic, أصيل, original. This means that it is from the authentic source. Okay? Another thing that is being kept and protected here with message authentication is that it is timely and in correct sequence. Timely and in correct sequence. So it reached me in the correct sequence, in the correct order. Like doing this first and then the other one and then the third one. Sometimes in some messages or some processes, the sequence is very crucial. Think about that. I said, for example, change the GPA for this student and then make him or change his status to be graduate. It is different than making his status graduate first and then change his GPA. For example, his GPA was 3.45 out of 4. He has a request that to review one of his exams. The request has been accepted and he deserves a higher grade, which will increase his GPA to reach 3.5. So we have to change his GPA first and then making him a graduate, خريج. His grade will be different from جيد جدا, for example, to ممتاز. It is totally different than making his status graduate and then change with his old GPA and then changing the grade. The GPA before making him a graduate is the one that is going to be accepted. So the message authentication will make sure that contents have not been altered, that the message is from an authentic source, and it is delivered to us in a timely and in correct sequence. And of course it uses the symmetric encryption. So this is the MAC, message authentication code. So there we have the original message. It is not encrypted, so the confidentiality is not of interest here. There will be a message authentication code algorithm generated using a key and attached to the original message, and it will be transmitted, it will be sent. When it reached, we will have the original message in addition to the generated MAC algorithm. The receiver will get the MAC algorithm and generate it using the same key and compare both the new generated one with the one received from the sender. If it is the same, so this means that all the three are kept safe and sound. So the contents have not been altered. It means that it is from authentic source and it is in correct sequence. But if it is different, so this means that one of these or all of them is compromised. Okay, this is another example using it, or using the other one that we are going to talk about it, the public key encryption or the asymmetric, while using two different keys. Here we can have something different than message authentication code, but with similar concept, which is hash functions. We can produce hash function and send it. One of the benefits of the hashing of hash functions here is to keep the integrity. It is heavily used by legal authorities when they are having specific digital evidences on their custody. If a digital criminal is caught, so not everyone should be allowed, but from the police or from the court, anyone should be allowed to manipulate or to go through the digital evidence direct or manually. The hash should be produced immediately at the time of catching that criminal, in order to avoid in order to have non-repudiation. So in order to avoid repudiation, denying in the court. Simply a criminal can claim at the court that he has not transferred that money, or he has not sent that email to his victim. because he can claim that one of the police officers who did so. But if the hash is produced at the time of catching that criminal, it will be produced again in front of the judge in order to prove that nothing has been altered since the time of catching that criminal. There are some requirements for hash functions in order to be acceptable. That hash function or that function should be able to be applied to a block of data of any size, so it shouldn't be limited to a specific size. It should produce a fixed length of output, so it has to be a fixed length. It has to be the same one that is produced for the same data every time. If the data is changed, yes, it has to produce a different one, even if that change is just putting a space, for example. It has to be different. But for the same data, the same plain text, it has to be exactly the same and with the fixed length, with the same size. It has to be relatively easy to compute for any given x, the hash function of x, where the x is the data. It has to be one way or pre-image resistance, so it should be computationally infeasible, not possible to reverse it. Okay, the output or its result, it shouldn't be the same for different data. So the hash function of y should not be equal than the hash function of x. And there must be a collision resistance or strong collision resistance. Infeasible to find any pair, to expect, to deduce, to infer that this data from the hash or so on. So these are the 6 requirements for a hash function to be acceptable. So the security hash functions, there are 2 approaches to attacking a secure hash function. The same as those attacks against symmetric encryption, exploit cryptanalysis or cryptanalytics attack, and brute force. Cryptanalysis exploit logical weaknesses in the algorithm itself, and brute force attacks it depends on the length of the hash function, like trying all possible keys. So if or the larger, the longer the hash function will be, the more difficult to break in. There are many different algorithms for them, but the most used or common one is SHA with its different version. We have MD5 and so on. Additional secure hash function applications like having passwords. Hash of a password is stored by an operating system. So we can have a password at the top of the hash function itself, make it an extra layer of security. We can have intrusion detection here, store H for the function, the hash for the function for each file on a system, and secure the hash values. So anyone will try to have access to them will be detected. Let's move now to the other type of encryption, which is called public key encryption or asymmetric encryption. The first one that we have been talking about is symmetric, that we said using one key only. This one is asymmetric, uses two separate keys, public one and the private one. The public key is made of public for others, is made public for others to use, whereas the private is kept for each party, for either the sender or the receiver. There must be some forms of protocols to distribute, to communicate the key. So see the difference between this asymmetric encryption, public key encryption, and the symmetric encryption. We have the plain text, the same concept. We have the encryption algorithm such as RSA here. It uses the public key of the other party. Okay, and then the produced ciphertext is sent to the other party to be decrypted using the private key of the receiver to have the plaintext. So if the receiver is different than the intended one, if the message is diverted to another party that is not authorized to get the message, so he will not be able to access it. Okay, is it clear? So we have two keys here, public one and private one. So here you can see that we can use the private to encrypt and public to decrypt, or the opposite, the public to encrypt and private to decrypt. But at the end, both of them should be used together for the whole process, the completed process. So user encrypts data using his or her own private key, and anyone who knows the corresponding public key will be able to decrypt the message. There are some crypto systems or some algorithms like we had or we saw for symmetric encryption, DES, triple DES, and AES. We have here RSA, Diffie-Hellman, DSS, elliptic curve, and so on. Some of them are used for digital signature, and some of them uses key to distribute the keys, using the symmetric encryption usually to distribute the keys and so on. Requirements of this asymmetric encryption is obvious, I think. It has to be computationally easy to create key pairs, easy for sender knowing public key to encrypt, easy for receiver knowing private key to decrypt, infeasible for unauthorized ones to determine the private key from the public key. These are some of the general data about each one of the asymmetric encryption algorithms. Mostly they are named at their inventors or developers, like Gravis, Shamir, and Adelman for RSA, Diffie-Hellman for Diffie-Hellman, and so on. But you don't need to memorize their history. Digital signature is similar to the concept of message authentication that authenticate both the source and the data integrity, but it is using here the asymmetric encryption rather than the symmetric one. And it is worth noting here and emphasizing that it doesn't provide confidentiality. It's even in the case of complete encryption, message is safe from alteration, but not eavesdropping. So it can be seen or accessed by unauthorized ones, but it cannot be modified. So this is where we have a message. We are going to use hash function or digital signature or certificate to attach it with the main message and with the public key to be sent, while the key is sent with different means. We have also a concept called digital envelope, and you can imagine what does it mean from its title, envelope, like putting the whole message into something like or act as an envelope of the letter, for example. So it protects a message without needing to first arrange for sender and receiver to have the same secret key. So it is similar to the digital certificate, but more than that, it is protecting also the confidentiality. So it is like a seal, like a khatam, closed. In order to produce the digital envelope, we can use random or pseudo-random key. The random number is a key for public key algorithms for asymmetric, stream key for symmetric stream cipher, it is acting as handshaking to prevent replay attack. It's like introducing the message itself or the original data for the first time or the second or third, so it cannot be stopped and replayed to other parties. It has also the session key, so in order to know its sequence and its time, it is criteria is that it is uniform distribution, it is unpredictable, it doesn't follow specific statistical formulas or so, it is completely random, so it is difficult to be guessed and predicted in future. Unlike the pseudo-random. Pseudo-random, it is not completely random. It follows usually a statistical or sequence or formula, but it is not easy to predict. Okay, so pseudo-random numbers are sequences produced that satisfy statistical randomness test, but it is likely to be predictable, not completely like random. There are many practical applications for encryption in general. You can read about them when it is common to use the encryption. Usually we use them to encrypt our data before storing them on our hard disk or our servers, or encrypting the backup and so on. So read through them. You don't need to memorize them, but understand the purpose or the good timing and places and where you are encouraged to encrypt your data. And bear in mind that it is recommended to encrypt sensitive and critical data both while they are stored or while they are transmitted. Okay, so we come at the end or to the end of this chapter where we talked about the symmetric encryption and asymmetric encryption. We talked about their types and their robustness based on the key size. We talked about message authentication with symmetric encryption and the digital signatures with asymmetric encryption, as well as the digital envelopes. Thank you very much.